Hello, hello, whoever, wherever, whenever you are. Thank you for clicking on to my video. This is going to be fairly short in YouTube, and then I'm going to um, probably do a longer live stream expanding on this. Every time I start to think I'm gone too far, I'm really reading too much into this stuff. I'm seeing something that might be a little extreme, like maybe I'm overdoing it. Every time I start to think that way, I start thinking people who are, a lot of people just don't want to see anything disturbing, so they kind of smooth things over for themselves. And they usually criticize me for just not doing that. And I start to think, well, maybe they're right. So I've been talking about the estuary and seeing some dark, sinister, cult like aspects to it. And I'm thinking, no, there's just a lot of nice guys trying to be, trying to bring Christianity back to this kind of happy medium, wholesome religious cultural thing. And I'm reading too much into it. And I'm telling myself that. Every time I do that, next thing I know, something comes up that says, no, you're not reading too much into this. In fact, you didn't even go far enough. And it happened again. Okay, all the guys, and it's mostly guys, involved with the estuary movement. That's a multi-denominational, almost syncretic, but really they stick pretty solidly to the Protestant Calvinist attitude. They're very. It doesn't take much to scratch the surface and see how anti-Catholic they are. They have Jonathan Pageau on as an Orthodox, and they're pandering to people they call the ortho bros, which are mostly, interestingly enough, they're mostly young Christian men who are turning to Orthodox Christianity because of the failure, because most of the charismatic Pentecostal movement in the United States is actually part of the Branhamite um, latter day, not Latter day Saints, that's the Mormons, the latter rain Pentecostal, that's demonic voodoo stuff. They call down angels. No, you don't, human beings don't call angels. There's a hierarchy involved in which God sends angels, and you have to understand this. And if you're an atheist who thinks, well, the whole thing is nonsense anyway, consider that there's a logical progression so that you don't have to be an actual believer to look at the theology and say, well, wait a minute, the logical progression of biblical theology places the angels in a position where it's not up to human beings to command them. The biblical description of angels also describes fallen angels who are demons. And there's a Greek tradition in which the word demon refers to a spirit that you can command. And there are all kinds of warnings by Christian authorities, and by authority I mean people who kind of know their stuff, that if you start the practice of calling angels and trying to do this command Christianity stuff, which is really not Christian, it's black magic. It's a very voodoo related thing. Okay. I've gone far afield. You don't see much of that going on with the estuary. The estuary kind of goes for the intellectual, middle of the road that tries to stay away from the Pentecostal, which is mostly the post television Pentecostal stuff. There is an old form of Pentecostalism, which is very hard to find these days. If it exists anywhere, it's in deep hiding, that sticks to the original biblical form. It's very different from the circus that you see going on with these televangelistic types. And so you've got these young men who are looking around, and we are in a society in which there is a matriarchal war against everything masculine. I mean, it's horrific when you really think about it. It's embarrassing to be a human being these days. So these guys are turning to the Orthodox faith. And that's an interesting turn because when you have a group of people from one cultural background go as a group into another cultural background, whether it's immigration from one ethnic part of the world to another, like, immigrants coming into the United States and they create their little enclaves in which they preserve their old culture under the umbrella of the new. Maybe that's going on with these orthobros. I don't know because I'm not part of the Orthodox parish. I know that what I see in the videos is not what I would identify with the Orthodox Christians I knew in past years were Greek Orthodox, and they were Greek. I mean, they were real Greek people, real Greek Americans. They're Orthodox church, and I went to a wedding of a friend who was Greek, and you know, it's not at all like the weird. It almost looks like these orthobros are doing Pentecostal stuff dressed up with icons. And I'm not sure if it's on purpose or if it's just a side effect of the fact that it's not easy to just switch cultures, because there's a lot more going on than just a question of theological doctrine. But anyway, that's far afield. But that is part of what you see in the estuary, except the estuary is not Orthodox Christianity. It's it's almost like reaching out to these guys who are leaning into the Orthodox conversion. But there's something that isn't quite right with what's going on. Now they feature a lot Jonathan Peugeot a lot. And there's Jonathan Peugeot is actually a convert from that kind of background, non-denominational Christian background. He grew up in French Canadian American culture, I think in Canada, I'm not sure. But his family went into some kind of non-denominational Baptist thing, and he really grew up in that, but within the culture, and then became an icon artist, icon carving, sacred art, and he writes books and gives lectures on symbolism and the sacred meanings and everything, which is all very good. And he is, I think, heavily marketing his stuff, and that's very good because you have to these days. The internet is set up in such a way that if you are trying to reach people with an art form, you have to control how it goes out. And because he's not into, I mean, he forms a kind of bridge between the Protestant American, the modern Christian stuff and the Orthodox tradition. And because he's doing it as an artist, he really has a deep connection to the real tradition. Very different from the Orthobros. The Orthobros, for the most part, the videos that I've looked at, like I say, they're just evangelicals dressed up with icons. And they don't understand the difference. And all I know about it, because I grew up in the Latin Rite church, people call it the Roman Catholic, but really that's kind of a pejorative. It's the Latin Rite, based in Rome, that, and I remain in that. So my knowledge of real Orthodox church stuff is through exposure to the people who are not converts to it, but it's their native culture. And the atmosphere and how they behave and how they relate to outsiders is very different from the evangelical stuff that you see in these orthobro kinds of videos. Which isn't saying that that's what the orthobros are doing. The orthobros, I'm referring to the young converts. You know, that might just be how they come across in video because that's how they're publicly presenting. And they could actually be doing some real deep change and understanding of becoming part of a deeper, more well rooted church. Um, the Estuary movement, like I say, I'm suspicious of their treatment because they are heavily anti Catholic. A couple of them actually set up an ambush on Jonathan Peugeot that really made me angry because Jonathan was trying to get people to see something about sacred space. You have to be respectful of your setting, it's very important. A worship space has to reflect the reason that you're there. And quite often, an evangelical Pentecostal space is deliberately ugly, deliberately made to just, oh, it's just a storefront where it's not important. We're not going to worry about the spirit, the physical out surroundings. Um, but sometimes they actually put a lot of energy into creating a show, a setting on stage that looks like hell. I'm serious. I almost walked out. I didn't because I was with a friend as her guest, and I just had to sit there and wait till we could leave. Um, it was a worship service, and they had smoke coming up around their little kind of like some kind of smoke producing stuff for stage effects. The Christian band was doing a rock and roll Christian stuff. They don't say Jesus in their hymns, and that I started to notice that quite a while ago. A lot of these and Estuary's got its share of Bethel-oriented, Hillsong-oriented people. Quite often, you will hear 4 or 5 of their hymns, and you will not hear Jesus named. They will refer to Lord, but after a while, you begin to wonder who is this Lord that they're referring to? They also have a lot of language which is demonic, and they don't understand that that's what they're doing. It's the same thing as calling down angels. You can't call and command angels. You can call and command demons if you're into that, and that's what you're doing. Well, these hymns, these worship songs frequently have things like, oh, what struck me once, it was in a Baptist church, okay? They were singing, we ascribe, or I ascribe unto you, Lord. I ascribe unto you? That's making me the author of something being handed to God. That's the reverse of what you're supposed to be doing in a worship service. And it's full, when you start to notice it, you can't unsee it. These things are, these modern worship songs are full of idolatry of the human self, arrogant, narcissistic self worship, making God into basically the waiter who has to deliver the order according to what you picked off the menu. Seriously, it's very, and you don't see that in the Estuary. This little corner, they're very intellectual, but you do see this kind of steering. And I think that I started to get angry because what they did with Jonathan Peugeot was talking about the aesthetics of worship space. And he commented that if you don't know anything about the doctrines, and he said that right at the beginning, This is, if you just stepped into the space of the Blue Mosque, that beautiful, I guess it's almost 700 years old mosque that was, I think, was built by the Emperor Saladin during the Ottoman Empire. And it's all done in tile and it's called the Blue Mosque. And he said, if you just walk in there and then you just walk into a typical televangelist, I don't know what phrase he used, but he was referring to Pentecostal, you know, basic church, storefront type churches, and Christian concert stuff. He said, the one that's going to make you feel that you can worship is going to be the mosque. He was not promoting Muhammad over Jesus. Not at all. He was specifically saying that there's something going on here. There's something wrong with what Christians are doing if we can't create a worship respectful space. But the Estuary, this little pocket people, set up an ambush to accuse him. He wasn't part of it. It was a stream where a couple of them wanted to start a fight to create a hate campaign against Peugeot for saying that. And they deliberately misrepresented what he said because it was in an X page tweet, an X tweet, as if he were, in fact, promoting Muhammad over Jesus. A complete slanderous misrepresentation. And I got in and I kind of, yeah, I let him have my 2 cents. And then I rage quit because I realized I was just angry. And I realized how much anti-Catholicism is really rampant in that group. But and that's, you get used to it after a while. It's always going to be there. And I said, when I started to say I see something else, something really sinister, then I said, you know what? I'm just letting my own issues and feelings carry a little bit too far. I need to add some ice to that iced tea. Then I chanced upon one of the streams that are coming out of, because they're having their conference and they're very big on pulling people into this conference system, which the way it's set up, they're pretty much guaranteeing that they're only going to have upper middle class and middle class people there, which is another thing. I caught a glimpse of the LARPer pastor. That's what I'm calling him, Paul Vanderklay. He's a LARPer. He is an actual pastor of a Christian Reformed church in California. It's a Dutch denomination that goes way back to colonial days. So it's an old style legacy Protestant church, Calvinist, and extremely anti-Catholic. And he's trying to be Mr. Nice Guy to everybody. And he facilitates the channel setups and the Estuary. And the Estuary organization apparently is a big part of his thing. There was something he was saying about people. And he always has this Mr. Nice Guy face, very sweet, gentle, the kind of person who can easily, smoothly make everyone feel comfortable at a meeting. And that's good. That's what a good pastor does. But when he mentioned people who don't pay their taxes, his mask dropped and you saw a real hatred for a split second. And then he went back to Mr. Nice Guy. And I laughed because I said, well, isn't that your typical American WASP? Your typical go back to the days of the Puritan Protestants, where your virtue is signaled by your material affluence. And That, of course, is always going to be a problem with the Protestants because it's a materialistic base of their religion. So I saw that. So I said, well, then I said, well, maybe it's just his impersonal. But of course, he is running a Discord and he is promoting a Discordian chaos magic performance artist who performs as if he's almost a MAGA conservative, like really pushes the extreme, but does it in such a way that it's very unsettling. And simultaneous with that, the LARPer pastor has on his stream a man who's obviously a man, not appearing to want to pretend to be anything else, but who has his "these are my pronouns" thing heading under his name on the screen. Now, I'll do a video on why that is extremely destructive and should not be allowed. The use, the convincing of children, and it's going on, and we are never going to recover from this. Our children are never going to recover from what bastards like that do, especially the ones in the public school system. These monsters are taking kindergarten, first grade, second grade, the very tenderest age of figuring out who you are in the world, the very beginning of figuring out who you are in the world, and teaching those children that they can't even use simple judgment as to whether they're looking at male or female. They can't even expect other people to look at them and know if they are a boy or a girl. They have to present permitted pronouns. And then they also have the nonsense stuff that is not about gender, it's about destroying language. Destroying language, destroying the human ability to think. It is an extreme assault on children. Paul Vanderklay promotes it on his streams. He puts that guy up there with his pronoun, and I said, okay, what is really going on here? I'm seeing something so deeply satanic. And I'm thinking, nope, it's me being overreactive. And then I see this. Like I said, they're starting to do these little streams, and they're all done with music, kind of everyone's loving. It's so obvious. It's right out of the anti-cult movement's pages of how you can tell this is a cult when they do these everybody is in utopia meetings, and they're doing all these videos showing that they're all in this utopian ecstasy. And one of them, the guy who promotes Hillsong, which is a satanic movement, and that guy is talking to somebody that's a part of the Estuary, apparently, from what he was saying, who identifies himself as being from the Institute for Cultural Evolution. Okay. I'm going to try to do this so you can see it, and I'll put some links, but I couldn't get everything on one screen to do a screen cap. When I put Institute for Cultural Evolution into Google, the first thing that comes up is their own website right here. Okay. And I want you to notice it's the website under their own name. And if you go over to it, you'll see a lot of kind of plain vanilla, modern Christian liberal, you know, love everybody and be nice and don't go overboard kind of stuff. But then, now that, of course, takes up the whole page. It's their thing. Google does it that way. But after you look at their own thing and you're doing a search, you go down the page, then you start to see all the other references to Institute for Cultural Evolution. It's got their Facebook page. Steve McIntosh is one of the founders, and they've got his own separate page. Charity Navigator, rating for Institute for Cultural Evolution. But right at the top, Center for Process Studies. Center for Process Studies. Have you ever heard of the Process Church? Charles Manson? Some of the worst cult like things of the 70s and 80s came out of something called the Process Church. The Process Church is something that started in England. And this is centerforprocess.org. I'm going to go over to their thing, Institute for Cultural Evolution. And see, I thought I'm going overboard with identifying what Paul Vanderklay is doing as a LARPer pretending to be Christian in order to bring people into a satanic cult. Okay, no, I'm not going to let you send me. Here it is. All partner organizations. Institute founded by Steve McIntosh. Same one. This is the Center for Process Studies. That group, I don't know, am I losing the light here somehow? What happened there? Okay. That group is related. I'm not sure exactly how, but it is. If you look at everything long enough, you'll see there is a relationship between the Process Church and Salem's Temple, the Satan's Temple in Salem, Massachusetts, the Lucian Greaves organization. Lucian Greaves himself was a writer for the Process. At the time that he was writing under his real name, Doug Mesner. Lucian Greaves is his nom de guerre, a name he took when he became part of the satanic religion, the Satan's religion, not just satanic, but the actual worship Satan, put up the statues of Moloch. And I'm going to do some stream that goes at length on some of this stuff. I'm just kind of touching on the whole thing and how it touches this estuary movement. And it's almost as if this little pocket TLC that they call themselves in YouTube, it's almost as if they're training actors to get into the moderate level of Christians who can say, yeah, you know, like the MAGA people that get involved with the new apostolic Reformation, that, you know, and the stuff that gets into Benny Hinn and Pentecostal circus time, all that crazy stuff. And you say, no, I'm just kind of a plain vanilla Episcopalian type of person, or ordinary Catholic Sunday morning type of person. You're going to be tempted to like the Estuary because they have they do have very interesting discussions. But more and more, I've begun to notice that the discussions have a kind of, you're being funneled. You get the feeling after a while. Okay, now their description is the Institute for Cultural Evolution is a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Colorado. The Institute was founded by Steve McIntosh and Carter Phipps in 2013 as a boutique think tank. Boutique. Yeah, they are definitely gonna check your Calvin Klein's to see if you really belong with them. Make sure you're drinking a good vintage wine and not some street wine. Focusing on culture war issues. The Institute's political position is neither left nor right nor centrist. We don't undertake lobbying efforts or back political candidates. We're not associated with any political party. The Institute's essential value proposition is based on an approach to social challenges known as the developmental or integral perspective. This emerging perspective seeks higher ground and works to synthesize and harmonize the values and positive goals of all sides. You can't, you can't do that. How can you synthesize the value of an individual relationship with Christ, which allows for all kinds of veering from the path? The whole repeated Christian aspect of sinning and forgiveness, etc. We don't run around chopping people's heads off. How can you synthesize that with the Islamic tradition, in which someone who explores another religion is basically, it's fair game to kill them? And they do. There's all kinds of ways in which you can't synthesize. You can't synthesize Christian life or free loving life with Judaic and Islamic genital mutilation of both boys and girls. Yeah, the Jews only do it to their boys, but they're doing the same thing. In fact, when you start to really look at Islam and Judaism, you are looking at the same religion. Why do the Muslims have as a central part of their religious practice and faith the black cube in Mecca? And if you look at an Orthodox Jew wearing his prayer phylacteries around his arm and on his head, you see an exact proportionate scale model of the Islam idol of the black cube. And they both practice genital mutilation as the identifying factor of being part of their religion and in their community. And you doing that to babies. Babies don't have time. In Islam's case, they do wait until the child is at least old enough so that they try to explain to him what's going on, and he's not psychologically destroyed as a human being. Jews do it to infants who have no words, who have no way to assimilate or accommodate or somehow absorb the genital torture of pain that they receive upon the cutting of the penis. When you do something that painful to a pre-verbal infant, you are placing a deep muscle memory trauma that cannot be resolved through talk therapy later in life. At least a young man who's been circumcised under Islam, as when I guess 7 or 8 is when they do it, he, at least, if he comes out of Islam and starts to think about the trauma he's been through, he can at least identify what happened and think about it. So that's a slight difference. And then the thing about the females, that mostly it's the Islam. I didn't realize that they do that to females, but they do. They destroy a woman's genitals, and you consider what that means. And it's the same thing. And I think they do it to infants. And nobody's allowed to speak of that. I don't care what the Jews think about Jesus. I do care about human beings who genitally torture babies. That has to stop. But to stop that, you erase the Jewish identity. Well, I'm all for erasing that identity. Because if that identity requires genital torture of infants, it should be erased. Yeah. But anyway, the process church is now, this is not the process church, it's Center for Process. Okay, other partners. Church for Our Common Home. And it has the icon of the Black Madonna. There are several icons called the Black Madonna. I'm not familiar with this one. Some of them have darkened because of varnish over the ages, but some of them are painted that way. Okay, a non this is something totally not Christian. It's just a general charity. A nonprofit that provides artistic, religious, and psychological services to awaken to the moral and ecologic crisis as an invitation for spiritual growth, creating loving community with all of creation, caring for our common home, Mother Earth. And it refers to the goddess. This looks, see, they're using an icon that identifies it with Eastern Catholicism, Eastern Orthodox, and the Polish have a lot to do with the icon of the Black Madonna. But when you read the description, they're all about the goddess and Mother Earth and, Greta Thunberg. More partners. Oh, these don't have names, they just have symbols. Okay, Flagstaff College. Whoops. Well, anyway, that's the process part. And it gets more interesting as you go down. Process Century Press. Let's see what this is. It's not clicking over. Oh, here it goes. Process Century Press is an academic press associated with International Process Network dedicated to transdisciplinary applications of process thought. The press publishes books that view scholarly issues and world concerns from a process perspective. Christogenesis, New Age stuff. Mm. Well, it's up in Portland, Oregon. So, anyway, like I say, I'm thinking, oh, Denise, you've been too hard on Paul Vanderklay. He's just a nice guy. Trying to, he's openly said he's trying to figure out how to keep an income stream going that'll accommodate his and his wife's lifestyle, which is very upper middle class. And the church, and the thing is, it isn't fair to actually be doing something that's out there for everybody and expect an enclosed congregation of an actual church to be supporting all this stuff that is for people who are not part of that church. I think when you belong to a church that has a creed and a denominational identity, the members of that church have a right to control their internal financial structure, and opening them up to all these other people. Like I say, that's between him and his congregation, but I think he's not, I don't think he's dealing in good faith with his own congregation. And I don't think this little pocket in general, the more I see about this estuary movement, I'm seeing the process church. That really threw me that they're bringing that in. But it explains a lot. It explains why they're comfortable with chaos magic practice, why they've got this veneer of Mr. Nice Guy, And when you start to poke at it, you see them drop the mask. That's why I'm doing this. Because they're coming in the side door with a very, very sinister thing. And there's a lot of stuff going on in political religion, political culture as influenced by religion. That's very disturbing. The influence of the latter rain Pentecostals, the New Apostolic Reform movement, on Trump's support network is disturbing. I won't go into why here because I've already gone way over my limit. And then the Orthodox thing, there's a whole thing with that I've got to address in a live stream. I'm going to do some live streams on Trump's um, relationship to this new apostolic reform, the third temple cult among the Jews, the process church, and Satan's temple in Massachusetts, the Estuary, and Satan's temple. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting August. Denise Macteau, over and out.